The world believes Erling Haaland is unbreakable. A 6'5" scoring machine who broke the Premier League's single-season goal record, won the treble in his very first year at Manchester City, and terrified defenders across Europe before he'd even turned 23. To the outside world, he looks like the closest thing football has to an indestructible force. But underneath the goals is a body that has broken down again and again. Hip flexors, ankles, a stress reaction that once sidelined him for nearly 2 months. And underneath the trophies is a young man who, at 24, was quietly becoming a father while the same fans chanting his name were also questioning whether he could still be trusted to carry a team. So what does it cost to look unstoppable when your own body keeps reminding you that you're not? If Erling Haaland's story means something to you, leave a like for Erling before we get into it. Erling Braut Haaland was born on July 21, 2000, in Leeds, England, while his father, Erling Haaland, was playing for Leeds United. When Erling was 3, the family returned home to Bryn, a small town in southwestern Norway with a population of roughly 12,000 people, a place about as far from the glare of the Premier League as football gets. His father's career gives Erling's story its first quiet wound. Erling was a solid, hard-working Norwegian international who spent years in England with Nottingham Forest, Leeds, and Manchester City. In April 2001, during a Manchester derby, Manchester United captain Roy Keane delivered a tackle on Erling's knee that has gone down as one of the most notorious in Premier League history. Erling continued playing for 2 more seasons, but the knee never fully recovered, and by 2003 he was forced into retirement. He would later admit the pain in that knee never went away. Erling grew up in the shadow of that story, the son of a footballer whose body, not his talent, had decided when his career would end. As a boy, Erling was a phenomenal all-around athlete, at one point holding a Norwegian long jump record for his age group before choosing football exclusively. He trained at Bryn FK, the same small club his father had once played for, in a town where everyone already understood how quickly the game could take something away from you. That contrast, a global superstar's future being built inside one of Norway's smallest football towns by a family that had already learned football's cruelty firsthand, became the quiet foundation beneath everything that followed. Haaland's rise began under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer at Molde, where his physical development and finishing accelerated rapidly. In January 2019, he moved to Austrian club RB Salzburg, and that September, in his Champions League debut, he scored a hat-trick against Genk, instantly signaling that this wasn't an ordinary teenage striker. In January 2020, Haaland transferred to Borussia Dortmund. Within 9 minutes of his Bundesliga debut, he had already scored, finishing the match with a hat-trick against Augsburg. Over the following 2 seasons, he became one of the most feared strikers in Europe, but his rise was constantly interrupted. In the 2021-22 season alone, hip flexor and muscular problems cost him 16 matches, part of a pattern that would follow him for years. In October 2021, Dortmund manager Marco Rose confirmed Haaland would be out for a few weeks with another hip flexor injury. Haaland's own message afterward was short and determined. He was focused on recovery, and he would come back stronger. In the summer of 2022, Manchester City activated his release clause, reportedly worth around €51.75 million, and Haaland arrived at the Etihad under enormous pressure to prove he could adapt to Pep Guardiola's demanding system. He silenced every doubt in his first season. 36 Premier League goals, a new single-season scoring record, and a historic treble, Premier League, FA Cup, and Champions League, all in his debut year in England. The goals made headlines, but behind them, the pattern that had haunted him at Dortmund never fully disappeared. City's medical staff built an entire fitness philosophy around managing his explosive minutes, substituting him early, protecting his joints from the sheer physical toll his 6'5" frame put on them at full speed. The most feared striker in the world was also the clearest crack in the image of an unbreakable Haaland came during the 2023-24 season, when a stress reaction injury sidelined him for 53 days, forcing him to miss 11 matches, including the 2023 FIFA Club World Cup, one of the biggest stages in the sport. For a player whose entire brand was built on relentless availability and raw physical dominance, watching City compete without him and adapt without missing a step, was a different kind of exposure. It proved City could survive without him. It also proved, undeniably, that he wasn't the machine the headlines made him out to be. It was a quiet, unglamorous kind of vulnerability, not a public breakdown, but weeks of rehabilitation, treatment tables, and uncertainty, far from the roar of the crowd that usually greeted his name. Away from football, Haaland's personal life has remained almost entirely private, a rarity for a player of his fame. His partner, Isabel Hogsing Johansson, grew up alongside him in Brine, playing for the same boyhood club. The two knew each other for years before their relationship became public in November 2022. By Haaland's own account in a later Norwegian interview, it was Isabel who reached out first. In December 2024, the couple welcomed their first child, a son. The news became public almost by accident. After a Premier League match against Leicester, Pep Guardiola told reporters that Haaland had just become a father for the first time, describing it as an emotional few days for his player. Haaland himself had said little about it beforehand, true to the same instinct for privacy his family had always guarded in Brine. One quiet, unglamorous detail stands in sharp contrast to his global fame. Haaland has described enjoying ordinary evenings simply cooking dinner at home with Isabel, a detail almost comically small next to a man whose face appears on billboards across the world. For someone whose every touch on a football pitch is analyzed by millions, becoming a father meant stepping, deliberately, into a role the cameras were never invited to see. The hardest stretch of Haaland's career arrived precisely when the two biggest parts of his life collided. In December 2024, just as he became a father for the first time, he was also enduring one of the quietest scoring stretches of his career and facing public criticism during a difficult run of form for Manchester City, who were struggling collectively that season under Guardiola. Guardiola publicly defended him, pointing out that Haaland was exhausted, carrying a heavy workload, and adjusting to fatherhood, all at once. Then, in early 2025, an ankle injury sidelined him for roughly 40 days, one more entry in an injury history that, by that point, had already cost him well over 300 total days out across his career, more than any other issue tied to knee, hip, and ankle problems. For the son of a man whose own career had been ended by a single knee injury, every twist, every precautionary substitution, carried a weight that had nothing to do with statistics. Fame, money, and a release clause worth tens of millions of euros could not protect Haaland's joints from the physics of his own frame, could not silence the critics during a rare goal drought, and could not slow down the sleepless nights of new fatherhood. For a young man who had built his identity on being the most dominant physical force in world football, 24 was the year that force proved, again and again, that it had limits. What followed was one of the most remarkable redemption arcs in recent international football. Norway, led by Haaland's relentless scoring throughout qualifying, reached the 2026 FIFA World Cup, their first appearance in the tournament since 1998, 2 years before Haaland was even born. At the tournament itself, Haaland scored 7 goals across Norway's first 4 matches, wins over Iraq, Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, and Brazil, dragging his country to a quarter-final for the first time in its history. On July 11, 2026, Norway's run finally ended in a dramatic extra-time defeat to England, 2-1, with Jude Bellingham scoring both goals. Haaland was shackled for the first time all tournament, and a controversial VAR decision disallowed what would have been Norway's go-ahead goal. It wasn't the fairy tale ending, but by then, the storyline had already shifted, from questions about whether his body could hold up to genuine belief, shared across an entire nation, that he could carry them somewhere they had never been. Now in his mid-20s, Haaland's life looks different than it did at the peak of his individual dominance. He is a father. He is the focal point of both his club and his country. And he carries an injury history that will likely require lifelong management rather than a single fix. The goals remain relentless, but increasingly, those closest to him describe a player who treats his body, his family, and his privacy with the same seriousness he once reserved only for scoring. The world still sees Erling Haaland as unbreakable, a force built for a highlight reel, not a hospital bed. But his story was never really about invincibility. It was about a boy who grew up watching his father lose everything to one bad knee. learning early that greatness in football is always borrowed against a body that owes nothing back. True legacy was never going to be measured only in goals scored or records broken. It is measured in what a person builds around those numbers. A quiet family life in a small Norwegian town. A son who may never fully know how much his father sacrificed to give him an ordinary evening at home. And a country that, for the first time in nearly 3 decades, believed in something bigger than one player's talent. Somewhere in Brine, a boy is probably still practicing his long jump on a field that once belonged to his father, chasing distance, not knowing yet what the ball will one day cost him or give him in return. If Erling Haaland's rise, his injuries, or the quiet strength of a young father carrying an entire nation's hopes has meant something to you, tell us in the comments which moment of his story stays with you most. Share this video with someone who's watched him play. And to Erling, thank you for showing the world that even the most unstoppable forces are still, underneath it all, human.